Elon Musk saves Beyoncé from fire. Thick black smoke billowed into the night sky, blotting out the moonlight as flames roared through the penthouse of the sleekest high-rise in downtown Los Angeles. The party that had moments ago been a dazzling spectacle of luxury and celebration had dissolved into chaos. Shattered glass glittered on the floor like scattered diamonds, and the once glamorous guests scrambled for the exits, their shouts drowned out by the crackling fire. Beyoncé clutched her golden gown, her heels clicking against the marble as she ran through the hallways, coughing against the thick smoke. The fire had spread faster than anyone anticipated, blocking the main staircase and leaving her trapped. She reached a window and slammed her hands against it, gasping for air as the acrid fumes stung her lungs. Below, she could see fire trucks and emergency personnel gathering, their flashing lights creating a surreal contrast to the inferno above. "Help!" she shouted, but the sound barely carried over the chaos. The heat was unbearable, licking at her back and forcing her to retreat deeper into the room. She stumbled, her vision blurring as the smoke grew thicker. It was hopeless. No one was coming in time. This was it. But then, a sound cut through the noise. A low hum, rising in pitch, like a machine coming to life. She turned her head weakly toward the shattered window, her gaze searching the fiery haze. The hum grew louder, accompanied by a rhythmic chopping that rattled the glass. A gust of wind swept through the penthouse, fanning the flames but bringing with it a glimmer of hope. A helicopter hovered just outside, its blades slicing through the smoke. And then she saw him, Elon Musk, standing in the open side door of the chopper, his face illuminated by the blaze. He was speaking rapidly into a headset, his words indistinct over the roar of the fire, but his expression was resolute. "Hang on." His voice finally broke through, amplified by a speaker on the helicopter. "I'm coming in." Beyoncé blinked, unsure if she was hallucinating from the lack of oxygen. Elon Musk? The billionaire? What was he doing here? But there was no time to process the absurdity of the situation as he leapt from the helicopter onto the building's rooftop, a sleek, fire-resistant suit clinging to his frame. Strapped to his back was a futuristic-looking device that glowed faintly with blue light, humming as though alive. Inside the chopper, Elon's pilot called out, "You've only got a few minutes before the structure collapses." "That's all I need," Elon replied, his voice calm but firm. He activated a control on his wrist, and the device on his back whirred to life. Twin jets of compressed air shot out, propelling him down through the shattered window into the penthouse. Beyoncé's world tilted as the billionaire-turned rescuer landed with an almost inhuman grace, the force of the jets scattering the smoke momentarily. He straightened, his piercing eyes locking onto her as she slumped against the wall. "Beyoncé," he said, his tone urgent but reassuring. "We need to get you out of here." "No." She coughed, barely able to speak. "But I can't." "Yes, you can," Elon interrupted, kneeling beside her and pulling a small oxygen mask from a compartment on his suit. He gently placed it over her face, the cool, clean air rushing into her lungs. "Take deep breaths. We've got to move fast." She nodded weakly, her strength returning just enough to let him help her to her feet. The heat was oppressive, the fire roaring closer with each passing second. Elon scanned the room, assessing their best route of escape. The door to the main hallway was engulfed in flames, and the floor beneath them groaned ominously. "We're not going out that way," he muttered. He tapped a button on his wrist, and a holographic blueprint of the building flickered into view. He studied it for a moment before turning to Beyoncé. "There's a maintenance hatch that leads to the lower floors. It's risky, but it's our only shot." Beyoncé nodded, too dazed to argue. She clung to his arm as he led her toward the far end of the room, his suit shielding them from the worst of the heat. The floor buckled beneath their feet, sending a spray of embers into the air. Beyoncé stumbled, her heels snapping as she cried out in pain. Without hesitation, Elon scooped her into his arms, his grip steady and secure. "I've got you," he said, his voice cutting through her panic. "Just hold on." They reached the maintenance hatch, a heavy metal door partially obscured by debris. Elon set Beyoncé down gently and began clearing the wreckage, his enhanced suit giving him the strength to move beams and furniture with ease. He pressed a control panel beside the hatch, but the mechanism sparked and refused to budge. "Manual override it is," he muttered, pulling a multi-tool from his belt. Beyoncé watched in awe as he worked quickly, his hands moving with practiced precision. The fire roared closer, the heat singeing the edges of her gown, but she couldn't take her eyes off him. Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the chaos. Elon glanced at her, his expression softening for a moment. "Let's just say I've got a thing for solving impossible problems." The hatch finally gave way with a loud hiss, revealing a narrow shaft that descended into darkness. Elon turned to Beyoncé, his tone firm but encouraging. "It's going to be tight, but we can make it. You go first, I'll be right behind you." She hesitated, her fear threatening to overwhelm her, but the steady determination in his eyes gave her the courage to move. She gripped the sides of the hatch and began climbing down the metal rungs, the cool air below a welcome relief from the oppressive heat above. Elon followed closely, his suit's glow illuminating the shaft as they descended. Above them, the floor of the penthouse gave a final groan before collapsing entirely, sending a fiery plume of debris into the air. The force of the explosion rattled the shaft, causing Beyoncé to lose her grip. "I've got you," Elon shouted, reaching out and catching her just in time. He steadied her on the rungs, his voice calm despite the chaos. "Almost there. Just a little further." They reached the lower floor, where the air was clearer and the flames hadn't yet spread. Elon pushed open a maintenance door, leading them into a dimly lit hallway. The sound of sirens grew louder as they approached an exit, the cool night air finally hitting their faces as they stumbled outside. The crowd that had gathered outside the building erupted into cheers as Beyoncé emerged, her golden gown singed but intact. She leaned heavily against Elon, her breath ragged but steady. Cameras flashed, capturing the surreal image of the tech mogul and the superstar, side by side against the backdrop of the blazing inferno. The crowd outside the burning skyscraper was a mixture of stunned onlookers, emergency responders, and paparazzi who had somehow caught wind of the drama unfolding. Flashes of cameras erupted as firefighters worked tirelessly to extinguish the blaze. The night air was thick with tension, smoke lingering as a reminder of the chaos that had nearly consumed the night. Beyoncé leaned heavily against Elon Musk, her breath still ragged from the ordeal. She glanced up at him, her expression a mixture of disbelief and gratitude. "I don't know what to say," she managed between breaths. "You don't have to say anything," Elon replied, his voice calm and steady. He gestured to a nearby EMT, who rushed over with a blanket and a bottle of water. "Just take a moment. You've been through enough." The EMT wrapped the blanket around Beyoncé's shoulders and guided her to a waiting ambulance. She turned to look at Elon as she sat on the edge of the vehicle, her voice hoarse but determined. "What about the others? Are they all out?" Elon's jaw tightened, and for a moment, a flicker of doubt crossed his usually composed expression. "The evacuation team is doing everything they can," he said. "But I need to make sure." Before she could respond, Elon turned and strode back toward the building, his fire-resistant suit reflecting the orange glow of the flames. Beyoncé called after him, her voice breaking. "Wait, you've done enough, don't go back in." He paused, glancing over his shoulder. "No one else gets left behind," he said simply, before disappearing into the smoke. Beyoncé sat frozen, her heart pounding as she watched him vanish into the chaos. The flames had consumed much of the upper floors, and the building groaned ominously as firefighters shouted orders to one another. She wanted to scream, to beg him not to risk his life again, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she gripped the blanket tightly, her mind racing with everything that had just happened. A cameraman approached, shoving a microphone in her direction. "Beyoncé, what was it like being rescued by Elon Musk? Can you tell us what happened in there?" She turned to glare at him, her exhaustion and frustration boiling over. "What happened?" she snapped, her voice raspy, "is that people are still in danger. Stop taking pictures and let these people do their jobs." The cameraman hesitated, clearly taken aback, before stepping away. Beyoncé buried her face in her hands, the weight of the night pressing down on her. She wasn't used to feeling powerless, but in this moment, she could do nothing but wait. Inside the building, Elon moved with precision and purpose, his suit's augmented systems guiding him through the smoke and debris. A holographic map projected from his wrist, showing him the locations of heat signatures detected by the drone he had deployed earlier. Most of the occupants had been evacuated, but a few stragglers remained trapped on the lower floors. He found a man and woman huddled in a corner, their faces pale with fear. "It's going to be okay," Elon said, kneeling beside them. "Follow me and stay low." The couple nodded, their hands clasped tightly as they crawled behind him. The smoke was thick, the heat oppressive, but Elon's suit shielded them as he led them toward an exit. He activated a communication link on his headset. 2 survivors found on the 5th floor. "Escorting them to safety now." "Copy that," a firefighter's voice crackled in response. "Structure is unstable, get out as quickly as you can." Elon gritted his teeth as a loud crack echoed through the building, followed by a cascade of debris that blocked their path. "Stay close," he said, lifting a fallen beam with a strength that seemed almost superhuman. His suit whirred as the exoskeleton absorbed the weight, clearing the way for the couple to crawl through. By the time they reached the exit, Elon's face was slick with sweat, his breath labored despite the suit's advanced filtration system. The couple stumbled out into the open air, where paramedics quickly swarmed them. Elon lingered for a moment, catching his breath as he scanned the building one last time. The map on his wrist showed no remaining heat signatures, but the words of his pilot echoed in his mind. "You've only got a few minutes before the structure collapses." With a final glance at the burning skyscraper, Elon turned and made his way back toward the emergency vehicles. As he approached, the crowd erupted into cheers, their relief palpable as they saw him emerge unscathed. Beyoncé was standing now, her blanket draped loosely around her shoulders. She locked eyes with him, her expression unreadable as he approached. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, the chaos around them fading into the background. "You didn't have to do that," she said finally, her voice low but steady. "You've already done more than enough." Elon shrugged, his lips curving into a faint smile. "I didn't get where I am by stopping halfway." Her lips parted as if to say something more, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she simply nodded, the weight of her gratitude too heavy to put into words. The following morning, the news was ablaze with headlines about the fire and the unlikely hero who had stolen the show. Elon Musk, billionaire or real-life superhero? Beyoncé rescued in dramatic blaze, by none other than tech mogul Elon Musk. From Mars to firefighting, Musk saves the Queen Bee. Beyoncé sat in her hotel suite, scrolling through the endless stream of articles and social media posts. Pictures of her and Elon, her leaning against him, his suit glowing against the backdrop of flames, had gone viral. Fans flooded the comments with messages of relief, admiration, and disbelief. She sighed, setting her phone aside as she turned her attention to the steaming cup of tea on the table. The events of the previous night still felt surreal, like a half-remembered dream. She could still feel the heat of the fire, the rough texture of Elon's suit as he carried her, the unwavering determination in his eyes. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. She stood, wrapping her robe tightly around herself as she opened it to find one of her assistants holding a package. "This just came for you," the assistant said, handing her a small box wrapped in black paper. "No return address." Beyoncé frowned, her curiosity piqued as she took the box. She closed the door and carried it to the table, carefully unwrapping it. Inside was a sleek, silver device that looked like a miniature version of the tech Elon had used during the rescue. A small note was tucked beneath it, written in Elon's unmistakable handwriting. "For the next time you find yourself in a sticky situation." She couldn't help but smile, shaking her head as she set the note aside. Leave it to Elon Musk to turn a life-threatening event into a tech demonstration. But as she stared at the device, a thought struck her. Maybe this wasn't the end of their story. Later that afternoon, Beyoncé sat in the corner of a quiet hotel lounge, her mind still replaying the events of the fire. The smell of smoke clung faintly to her hair despite several showers, and her muscles ached from the tension of the night before. She stirred her tea absent-mindedly, her gaze fixed on the black package sitting in front of her. The sleek silver device Elon had sent was perched on the table, its polished surface reflecting the warm light of the lounge. It was compact but radiated a futuristic aura, the kind of thing you'd expect from someone like Elon Musk. Beyoncé's fingers brushed over the smooth metal, her curiosity tugging at her. She pressed the small button on the side, and a holographic screen flickered to life. The device's display read, "Prototype, Emergency Response Beacon. For use in critical situations only." Her brow furrowed as she scrolled through the menu options. It wasn't just a gadget, it was a fully functional emergency tool, capable of emitting distress signals, mapping escape routes, and even deploying a small drone. She leaned back in her chair, letting out a low whistle. Leave it to Elon to gift her something that felt like it belonged in a spy movie. She picked up the accompanying note again, rereading his brief but thoughtful message. For the next time you find yourself in a sticky situation. It was practical, sure, but it also felt oddly personal. Beyoncé tapped the edge of the device thoughtfully. Elon Musk wasn't someone she'd ever pictured herself crossing paths with, let alone being rescued by. But now, he was firmly lodged in her mind, a puzzle she couldn't quite piece together. The memory of his calm, unwavering determination as he carried her through the flames stirred something within her, gratitude, of course, but also curiosity. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. She glanced up to see one of her security team standing nearby, looking hesitant. "Miss Beyoncé," he began. "There's someone here to see you." Her brows lifted in surprise. "Who is it?" He hesitated, then said, "Elon Musk." Her heart skipped a beat. "Here? No." The guard nodded. "He's waiting in the lobby. Should I send him up?" For a moment, she considered saying no, brushing it off as unnecessary. But something compelled her to agree. "Send him in," she said, standing and smoothing her hands over her outfit. She wasn't sure why she suddenly felt nervous. Moments later, Elon stepped into the lounge, his presence immediately commanding the room despite his casual attire. He wore a simple black turtleneck and jeans, but his sharp gaze and air of quiet confidence made him seem larger than life. Beyoncé noticed the faint circles under his eyes, a reminder that he, too, had been through an exhausting ordeal. "Beyoncé," he greeted her with a faint smile, his voice as calm and measured as she remembered. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," she replied, gesturing to the seat across from her. "I was just thinking about last night." He sat down, his hands resting loosely on the table. "It was a long night," he said with a nod. "I just wanted to check in, see how you're doing." "I'm still processing, honestly," she admitted. "It's not every day you're pulled out of a burning building by one of the richest men in the world." He chuckled softly, a sound that felt oddly humanizing. "It's not every day I get to play firefighter," he said. "Though I have to say, you handled yourself incredibly well under the circumstances." Beyoncé let out a dry laugh. "I didn't feel like I was handling anything. I was terrified." "Fear's natural," Elon replied. "It's what keeps us alive. But you didn't freeze. You kept moving even when it seemed impossible. That's something to be proud of." She studied him for a moment, unsure how to respond. There was something disarming about his directness, the way he spoke with quiet certainty. "What about you?" she asked finally. "Why did you come back in? You could have just walked away." He shrugged, his expression turning serious. "I've never been good at walking away from a problem, and I knew there were still people inside. I couldn't leave knowing there was more I could do." Beyoncé nodded slowly, his words resonating with her. "You're a problem solver," she said. "Even when the problem is a burning building." "Something like that," he said with a faint smile. His gaze flickered to the device on the table. "I see you found the beacon." She smiled, picking it up and turning it over in her hands. "I did. It's impressive. I'm not sure I'll ever need it, though." "I hope you don't," he said. "But if you do, it's there. Consider it a backup plan." They fell into a comfortable silence, the weight of the previous night lingering between them. Finally, Beyoncé spoke. "Thank you, Elon. For everything. You didn't have to do any of it, but you did. And I'll never forget that." He met her gaze, his expression softening. "You're welcome," he said simply. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that people like us, people with a platform, a voice, we can't just sit back when there's something to be done. Sometimes we have to step into the fire. His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Beyoncé felt a flicker of something she couldn't quite name. Admiration, perhaps, or a deeper understanding of the man sitting across from her. Maybe you're right, she said quietly. Maybe I need to do more. Elon tilted his head, his curiosity piqued. What do you mean? She hesitated, then said, last night, it made me realize how fragile everything is. Life, safety, even the people we think are invincible. I don't want to just keep performing and pretending that's enough. I want to give back, make a real difference. He nodded slowly, his respect evident in his expression. If anyone can, it's you, he said. People listen to you. You have the power to inspire. Beyoncé smiled faintly. Maybe, but I'll need people like you to help me figure out where to start. Elon's lips quirked into a small smile. I think we can manage that. Over the following weeks, the two began working together on a joint initiative, a program aimed at improving emergency response systems and providing resources to underserved communities. Beyoncé used her platform to raise awareness and funding, while Elon leveraged his technology and expertise to develop innovative solutions. Their partnership captured the world's attention, sparking headlines and conversations across social media. But for the two of them, it wasn't about the attention. It was about making a tangible difference. One evening, as they stood on the rooftop of a newly opened emergency training center, Beyoncé turned to Elon with a thoughtful expression. Do you ever think about how strange it is? She asked. What's that? He replied. That we ended up here, she said. If it weren't for that fire, we might never have crossed paths. Elon considered this, then nodded. Life's funny that way, he said. Sometimes it takes something chaotic to bring the right people together. She smiled, her gaze drifting to the city skyline. Well, whatever brought us here, I'm glad it did. Me too, he said softly. As the city lights sparkled around them, the two stood in companionable silence, their shared mission forging a bond that neither could have anticipated. And though their journey had begun in the flames of disaster, it had led them to something brighter, a partnership that would change lives far beyond their own. Months had passed since the fire, but the events of that night had left an indelible mark on both Beyoncé and Elon Musk. Their joint initiative, aptly named Project Phoenix, had rapidly gained traction, drawing support from governments, philanthropists, and everyday citizens inspired by the idea of turning chaos into change. The program's first goal was simple but ambitious: to equip vulnerable communities with state-of-the-art emergency response technology and resources. Beyoncé had thrown herself into the project with the same energy and passion she brought to her music. She'd hosted concerts where proceeds went directly to the cause, using her voice to bring attention to the importance of preparedness. At every event, she told the story of that harrowing night, not as a tale of personal survival, but as a call to action. Elon, meanwhile, had turned his focus to the technological side of things. His team at SpaceX had developed a series of modular rescue devices inspired by the prototype he had used during the fire. Each one was designed to be compact, intuitive, and capable of functioning in the most extreme conditions. Drones equipped with heat sensors and communication relays could locate people trapped in disasters, while personal safety beacons ensured no one would go unnoticed. Despite their different worlds, Beyoncé and Elon had become an unlikely but effective team. Their partnership wasn't without its challenges. Elon's tendency to dive into technical minutiae often clashed with Beyoncé's more intuitive approach, but they'd learned to respect each other's strengths. Where Elon saw problems, Beyoncé saw people, and together, they'd found a balance that allowed Project Phoenix to flourish. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when the two met at a newly built emergency training facility on the outskirts of Houston. The facility was the first of its kind, equipped with virtual reality simulators, obstacle courses, and advanced robotics to prepare first responders for real-world disasters. Beyoncé arrived first, stepping out of a sleek black SUV dressed in a tailored coat that blended elegance with practicality. She looked around, her breath visible in the cool air, as a small group of reporters and local officials milled about nearby. Elon's late, she muttered under her breath, glancing at her watch. It wasn't unusual for him to lose track of time, especially when he was caught up in one of his countless projects. A few minutes later, a Tesla Cybertruck rolled into the lot, drawing the attention of everyone nearby. The door opened, and Elon stepped out, wearing his trademark black turtleneck and a windbreaker emblazoned with the SpaceX logo. He waved casually at the gathering crowd before striding over to Beyoncé. "Sorry I'm late," he said, his tone apologetic but relaxed. "Got caught up fine-tuning the drone demonstration?" Beyoncé gave him a wry smile. "You're lucky I'm used to waiting for you." Elon smirked. "Well, if you ever decide to start designing rockets, I'll happily return the favor." The two walked side by side toward the facility, their easy banter masking the gravity of their shared mission. Inside, the space was buzzing with activity. First responders tested the new drones in a simulated urban disaster zone, while trainees practiced navigating through virtual environments modeled after real-world catastrophes. As they moved through the facility, Elon pointed out various features with the enthusiasm of a proud inventor. "This is the next generation of search and rescue tech," he explained, gesturing to a drone hovering nearby. "It's equipped with AI-powered navigation and thermal imaging. It can locate survivors in record time, even in the most challenging conditions." Beyoncé watched as the drone zipped through an obstacle course, avoiding falling debris and zeroing in on a mannequin hidden under a pile of rubble. "Impressive," she admitted, her admiration genuine. "But do you think we can scale it fast enough? There are so many places that need this kind of technology." "That's the plan," Elon said. "We've already secured partnerships with several governments and NGOs. The challenge is making sure the tech is accessible, not just to wealthy nations but to everyone." Beyoncé nodded, her expression thoughtful. "It's not just about the tech though. People need to feel empowered, prepared. We can give them the tools, but they have to believe they can use them." Elon glanced at her, his respect evident. "That's why you're here. You make people believe." After the demonstration, the two found themselves alone in one of the facility's quieter rooms, a makeshift lounge where they could escape the press and officials for a moment. Beyoncé sank into a chair, stretching her legs as she let out a tired sigh. "You'd think I'd be used to the cameras by now," she said, shaking her head. "But this feels different. Bigger." Elon leaned against the counter, his arms crossed. "That's because it is. What we're doing here, it's not just about fixing a problem. It's about changing how people think, how they prepare for the unexpected." She looked at him, her expression softening. "You know, you surprise me on." He raised an eyebrow. "How so?" "When I first met you, well, technically when you pulled me out of a burning building, I thought you were just a guy who liked to play hero. But now, I see how much you care. About people, about the future. It's inspiring." Elon smiled faintly, his gaze dropping for a moment before meeting hers again. "Coming from you, that means a lot. I've always believed that if you have the ability to make a difference, you have a responsibility to do so. But I've never had a partner who could amplify that message the way you can." Beyoncé's cheeks warmed slightly at his words, though she masked it with a small laugh. "Careful, Elon. I might start thinking you actually like working with me." "Who says I don't?" he replied, his tone teasing but sincere. The moment hung between them, charged with something unspoken. But before either could say more, an assistant knocked on the door, reminding them they were expected at the closing ceremony. That evening, the training facility hosted a gala to celebrate its grand opening. The event was equal parts formal and hopeful, with speeches from local leaders and heartfelt testimonials from first responders who had already begun using the new technology. Beyoncé took the stage to perform, her voice filling the room with a stirring rendition of Halo that left the audience in awe. As she sang, Elon stood at the back of the room, his usually analytical mind quiet for once as he watched her. The way she commanded the stage, the way her voice seemed to lift the room, it was a reminder of why they made such a strong team. She brought heart to everything she touched, and that heart was what turned their shared mission into something truly transformative. When the performance ended, the room erupted into applause, and Beyoncé stepped off the stage to join Elon. He offered her a glass of champagne, which she accepted with a tired but radiant smile. To project Phoenix, he said, raising his glass. To turning chaos into change, she replied, clinking her glass against his. As the night wore on, the two found themselves standing outside, away from the crowd. The stars were bright above them, the cool air a welcome relief from the heat of the gala. Beyoncé leaned against the railing, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "You know," she said softly, "for all the craziness that's happened since the fire, I wouldn't change any of it." Elon glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. "Neither would I," he said. "Sometimes, it takes a spark to ignite something bigger." She smiled, her eyes meeting his. "Here's to the sparks." And with that, they stood in companionable silence, their shared journey just beginning but already blazing with possibility. The weeks following the gala were a whirlwind of activity. Project Phoenix had officially launched, with training centers opening in cities across the world and Beyoncé's advocacy fueling a surge of public interest. Social media was flooded with hashtags like #ProjectPhoenix and #RiseFromTheAshes, with people sharing stories of resilience and recovery. Every concert Beyoncé performed now carried an undertone of purpose, her voice echoing the call for preparation and unity. Elon, meanwhile, was busier than ever, dividing his time between SpaceX, Tesla, and his newfound passion for designing better emergency response systems. Yet no matter how packed his schedule became, he always seemed to find time to check in with Beyoncé, whether through a quick phone call or an unexpected appearance at one of her events. Their partnership had grown into something more than a shared mission. It was a genuine friendship, built on mutual respect and an unspoken understanding. It was on one of those rare quiet evenings, when neither of them had pressing commitments, that they found themselves in Los Angeles, sitting on the terrace of Beyoncé's home. The city lights sparkled in the distance, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of jasmine from her garden. A bottle of wine sat between them, half empty, as they talked about everything and nothing. "You know," Beyoncé said, swirling the wine in her glass, "I never thought I'd be working on something like this. My life was always about music, the stage, the next performance. But now, I feel like I've found a new part of myself." Elon nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "It's funny how life works. You start out with one plan, thinking you know exactly where you're headed, and then something comes along and changes everything. Like a fire," she said with a wry smile. "Or a key," he added, grinning. "Metaphorically speaking, of course." She laughed softly, leaning back in her chair. "You're full of metaphors tonight." "I have my moments," he said, his tone teasing. "But seriously, you've been incredible, Beyoncé. This project wouldn't be what it is without you. People listen to you in a way they never would to someone like me." "That's not true," she said, her voice soft but insistent. "You inspire people too. Maybe in a different way, but it's just as important." He looked at her, the weight of her words sinking in. For all his accomplishments, Elon had always struggled with the personal side of his work, the human connection that turned ideas into movements. Beyoncé had shown him how powerful that connection could be, how it could turn even the most abstract concept into something tangible and meaningful. "Thank you," he said quietly, his usual confidence giving way to something more vulnerable. "That means a lot." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the conversation giving way to the soft hum of the city below. Beyoncé glanced at him, a question forming in her mind. "Do you ever wonder what it would have been like if we'd met under different circumstances?" Elon raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What do you mean?" "I mean if there hadn't been a fire. If we hadn't been thrown into this crazy situation together. Would we still have ended up here?" He considered her words carefully before responding. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I like to think we would have found a way. Some people are just meant to cross paths, no matter the circumstances." She smiled, her eyes softening. "I think you're right." As Project Phoenix continued to grow, so did its challenges. Scaling the technology to meet global demand proved more difficult than Elon had anticipated, and Beyoncé faced criticism from some who questioned her sudden pivot to activism. Yet through it all, they remained steadfast, leaning on each other when the pressure threatened to overwhelm them. One of the project's most ambitious undertakings was a large-scale disaster simulation in Miami, designed to test their emergency systems in real time. It was the first event of its kind, bringing together first responders, community leaders, and volunteers from around the country. The simulation would replicate a hurricane scenario, complete with high winds, flooding, and power outages, giving participants a chance to put their training and technology to the test. The day of the event was a flurry of activity, with hundreds of people bustling around the simulation site. Beyoncé arrived early, dressed in a simple but practical outfit that allowed her to move easily through the crowd. She greeted volunteers and thanked them for their efforts, her presence a calming influence amidst the organized chaos. Elon was already there, overseeing the deployment of the drones and other equipment. His focus was laser-sharp as he directed his team, but he broke into a genuine smile when he saw Beyoncé approaching. "Ready for the big day?" he asked, handing her a tablet loaded with the event's itinerary. "As ready as I'll ever be," she said with a grin. "How about you? Everything running smoothly?" "So far, so good," he replied. "But we'll see how it holds up under pressure." The simulation began with a mock weather alert, followed by the gradual escalation of conditions. Floodwaters rose, power lines collapsed, and volunteers played the roles of stranded civilians in need of rescue. The drones performed admirably, mapping the affected areas and guiding responders to the most critical locations. Beyoncé joined a group of trainees, helping them navigate a particularly challenging section of the course. As the day wore on, it became clear just how transformative the technology could be. The drones located victims with pinpoint accuracy, while the personal safety beacons ensured no one was overlooked. Elon moved through the site like a conductor guiding an orchestra, his commands precise and efficient. Beyoncé, meanwhile, focused on the human element, offering encouragement and guidance to those on the ground. By the end of the simulation, the results were clear. Project Phoenix was working. The systems had performed beyond expectations, and the participants left feeling empowered and inspired. As the crowd began to disperse, Beyoncé and Elon found themselves standing on the makeshift command center platform, looking out over the site. "We did it," Beyoncé said, her voice tinged with both pride and relief. Elon nodded, a rare sense of satisfaction lighting up his features. "We did." She turned to him, her expression serious. "Thank you, Elon, for believing in this. For believing in me." He met her gaze, his eyes reflecting the same gratitude. "I could say the same to you. None of this would have been possible without you." For a moment, they simply stood there, the weight of everything they'd accomplished settling around them. The bond they'd formed over the past months felt stronger than ever, a partnership forged in the fire, both literally and figuratively. The following week, Beyoncé hosted a private celebration at her home to mark the success of the simulation. It was a small, intimate gathering with only a handful of close friends and key members of the Project Phoenix team. Elon arrived late as usual, but his entrance was met with warm smiles and congratulations. As the evening wound down, the two of them found themselves alone on the terrace once again, the city lights stretching out before them like a sea of stars. Beyoncé poured them each a glass of champagne, her movements unhurried as she savored the rare moment of quiet. "To Project Phoenix," she said, raising her glass. "To making the impossible possible," he replied, clinking his glass against hers. They drank in silence, the weight of their journey hanging between them. Finally, Beyoncé spoke, her voice soft but resolute. "You know, I never thought I'd be this close to someone like you." Elon glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. "Someone like me? Someone who sees the world the way you do," she said. "Big, endless, full of possibilities." He smiled, a faint blush creeping into his cheeks. "I could say the same about you. You've changed the way I look at things, Beyoncé. You've shown me what it means to connect, to inspire. That's not something I'll ever forget." She smiled back, her heart swelling at his words. "So what's next, Mr. Musk?" He chuckled, his gaze turning to the horizon. "The future," he said simply. "And whatever it holds." They stood there for a long time, the city buzzing quietly below them, their shared journey far from over. In that moment, they weren't just two people who had crossed paths by chance. They were partners, dreamers, and perhaps something more. The months rolled by, and Project Phoenix transformed from an ambitious initiative into a global movement. Training centers were popping up across continents, and the rescue technology Elon's team had designed became a standard for emergency response in many countries. Beyoncé's voice became synonymous with resilience and preparedness, her speeches and performances carrying the same fire that had fueled the project from the start. But the work came with its challenges. Both Beyoncé and Elon found themselves stretched thin, constantly moving between meetings, events, and the demands of their own lives. Still, they made it a point to connect, whether through late-night phone calls or stolen moments between their packed schedules. One night, as Beyoncé returned to her New York apartment after a long day of interviews and meetings, her phone buzzed with a message. It was from Elon. "Need your advice on something? Call when you're free." She smiled, shaking her head. Even after all these months, she found it endearing how direct he was. She set her bag down and dialed his number, not surprised when he answered on the first ring. "Hey," she said, kicking off her heels and collapsing onto the couch. "What's going on?" "Nothing too urgent," he replied, his voice calm but with that familiar edge of intensity. "I'm working on a prototype for a new Phoenix drone. It's smaller, faster, and can deploy in areas we couldn't reach before. But I'm stuck on how to present it to people." She raised an eyebrow, amused. "You're asking me for presentation advice?" "Of course," he said matter-of-factly. "You're the expert at getting people to care." She laughed, leaning back against the cushions. "Well, I'd start with a story. Something personal, something real. People connect with that. Maybe talk about the first time the original drones were used in a real disaster." There was a pause, and when Elon spoke again, his tone was thoughtful. "That's a good idea. You always have a way of bringing things back to what matters." She felt a warmth spread through her at his words. "It's what I do. You've got the tech, I've got the heart. Together, we're unstoppable." He chuckled. "Unstoppable, huh? I like the sound of that." They talked for another hour, the conversation shifting from work to lighter topics. Beyoncé found herself laughing more than she had in days, and by the time they said goodnight, her exhaustion had melted away. A few weeks later, they found themselves in Cape Town for the opening of a new training center, the first of its kind in Africa. The event was grand but meaningful, with performances from local artists and testimonials from first responders who had already benefited from Project Phoenix's technology. As Beyoncé and Elon stood backstage, watching the crowd, she turned to him with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever think about how far this has come? How it started with just the two of us?" "All the time," he admitted. "I think about that night in the fire. How everything could have turned out so differently." She nodded, her gaze distant. "It's strange, isn't it? How something so devastating can lead to something so beautiful." He looked at her, his expression softening. "I think about that too. About how meeting you changed everything." She glanced at him, her heart skipping a beat at the sincerity in his voice. For a moment, the noise of the crowd and the weight of their responsibilities faded, leaving only the connection between them. Their partnership reached a turning point later that year when a devastating earthquake struck a coastal city in Southeast Asia. The disaster was unlike anything they had prepared for. Entire neighborhoods reduced to rubble, communication lines severed, and tens of thousands of people displaced. Project Phoenix mobilized immediately, deploying drones, beacons, and rescue teams to the affected areas. Beyoncé and Elon arrived on the ground a few days later, determined to help however they could. The scene was overwhelming, families searching for loved ones, volunteers working tirelessly to distribute aid, and the ever-present hum of rescue drones scanning the wreckage. Beyoncé spent hours with survivors, listening to their stories and offering words of comfort. She joined volunteers in handing out supplies, her presence a source of hope for those who had lost everything. Elon, meanwhile, worked closely with local officials and rescue teams, troubleshooting technical issues and ensuring the drones were functioning at full capacity. One evening, as they stood together in the makeshift command center, Beyoncé turned to him with tears in her eyes. "This is why we're here," she said softly. "For moments like this. For people like them." He nodded, his gaze fixed on the map in front of him. "And it's why we have to keep going. There's so much more to do." The earthquake response became one of Project Phoenix's most significant achievements, solidifying its reputation as a force for global good. But for Beyoncé and Elon, it was more than just a professional milestone. It was a deeply personal reminder of why they had come together in the first place. As the weeks turned into months, their bond grew stronger. Late one night, after another successful event, they found themselves alone in a quiet corner of a bustling hotel ballroom. The glow of the city lights filtered through the windows, casting a soft light over the room. Beyoncé leaned against the railing, her champagne glass dangling loosely in her hand. "You know," she said, her voice quiet, "I never thought I'd find someone who understands me the way you do." Elon looked at her, his expression uncharacteristically vulnerable. "I could say the same about you. You've shown me things I never thought I'd see." She smiled, her heart full as she turned to face him. "I guess we're pretty good for each other." He nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "We are." For a moment, the world around them seemed to fade, leaving only the two of them in the quiet stillness. Neither of them spoke, but the unspoken understanding between them was enough. As the year came to a close, Beyoncé and Elon stood on the brink of something even greater. Project Phoenix had exceeded their wildest expectations, and the impact of their work could be felt across the globe. Yet, for all their accomplishments, it was the journey they had shared that mattered most. On New Year's Eve, they found themselves back in Los Angeles, watching the fireworks light up the night sky from the terrace of Beyoncé's home. The air was crisp and cool, the sound of laughter and celebration drifting up from the streets below. "Here's to a year we'll never forget," Beyoncé said, raising her glass. Elon clinked his glass against hers, his smile warm. "And to the next one, whatever it may bring." They stood side by side, their gazes fixed on the horizon, as the fireworks painted the sky in vibrant colors. In that moment, they knew they had found something rare and extraordinary, not just in the work they had done, but in each other. Whatever the future held, they were ready to face it together.